Hi there, continuing on in our applying percents unit. This lesson is on percent equation and percent proportion. So we already know how to find the percent of a number, but sometimes we don't know what the percent is, or sometimes we don't know what the number is and we're given the part. So we have to use percent proportion as one of our methods to help us figure that out. So a percent proportion is two ratios that equal a proportion. One of the ratios compares part of a quantity to a whole quantity, so it's comparing the part to the whole. The other ratio is the percent as a number over 100, which we know percent is over 100, so that would make sense. So we always set up our problem that we're given as a proportion. So sometimes we need to find the percent, like what percent of 6 is 3. Sometimes we need to find the part, like what number is 50% of 6. And then sometimes we have to find the whole, like 3 is 50% of what number. So different types of problems that we need to know how to set up. So let's practice some. So we first want to ask ourselves, what are we looking for? Are we looking for the part? Are we looking for the whole? Or are we looking for the percent? What percent of 24 is $18? So what percent, and then we have of 24 is $18. So this one's pretty basic because we know for sure that we're finding the percent, okay? The whatever number is attached to the of, so sometimes the of is before, sometimes it's after, tells us that that's the whole. So we're taking, and that's what we're taking the percent of. So that's the whole, the whole. And then the 18 is attached, whatever's attached to the is, that's the part. So that kind of helps us as we set up as our proportion. So we are going to do part over whole, or we can think of it as is over of, and I'm looking at this right here. So we're going to do 18 over 24 equals, and we put our percent over 100. We don't know what the percent is, so we make that x. Now we solve. If you remember how to solve proportions, remember we take the diagonal of the two numbers that are in the diagonal, so we would do 18 times 100 and then divide it by the third number. So if I do 18 times 100, I get 1,800, and then I'm going to divide that by 24, and I get x equals 75. Remember, that's a percent that we're looking for, so we would make it 75%. Okay, and then we ask ourselves, does 75% of 24 make sense that it would be 18? And yes, that does make sense. Okay, what number is 60% of 150? So what number, so we're taking 60% of 150 and we want to know what it equals, okay? So we don't know what the part is, so it's going to be x over 150, and then 60% is over 100. Okay, because we're taking 60% of 150. That's why that goes on the bottom there. Okay, so this time then we're going to multiply 150 times 60 and then divide it by 100. And we will get x equals 90. So what that means is 60% of 150 should equal 90. And then we have 13 is 26% of what number? So 13 is, and then 26% of what number? So we're taking 26% of something to get 13. So whatever I'm going to get, whatever the part is, that's on the top, over whatever I'm taking the percent of, which I don't know, and then it's going to be 26 over 100. The ratio with the percent is pretty easy because we know that that's always going to be, if it has a percent sign behind it, it's going to go on the top over 100, and if we don't have the percent, that's going to be x over 100. So then we would do 13 times 100, so I would get 1,300 divided by 26, and I get x equals 50. So this is telling me that 26% of 50 equals 13. So if I do 26% of 50, which we know how to do now, right? Remember that we would just take 0.26 times it by 50. So if I do that, 0.26 times 50, I get 13. Another method that we can use is the percent equation. So we have the proportion where we set it up as a proportion, and then the percent equation is when we would set it up as an equation, and we would do part equals percent times whole. Okay, so again, we have the different types of percent problems. Okay, and then here is how it would be set up as an equation, not a proportion, as equations, which we will look at in our next examples. So let's do some using the percent equation. So let's remember that the percent equation is just going to be is equals percent times of. I know that seems really weird and confusing, but let's look at our problems and use that. 600 is what percent of 750? So the 600 goes with the is, what percent, and then of 750. So this is my part, and this is my whole, because I'm taking the percent of 750. So whatever I'm taking the percent of is the whole. Okay, so we're going to do 600 equals, we don't know what the percent is, so that's x times 750. Now we just have a one-step equation that we are experts at. Do our train tracks, divide both sides by 750, and I end up with, and if I do 600 divided by 750, all of these things would be great for you to be doing in your calculator with me, just so you're practicing, would be 0.8. But when we write the percent in the equation, we change it to a decimal, which means if we find it as a decimal, we have to change it back to a percent. So then we're going to go 2 to the right to make it a percent, which would give me 80. So I'm going to go on this side and do 80%. So 600 is 80% of 750. Let's look at another one. 45 is 90% of what number? So we have is equals percent times of. Okay, usually the is attached to the part. The of is attached to the whole. So I'm taking 90% of something equals 45. So 45 equals, I'm going to write my 90% as a decimal, which would be 0.9 times x. We have another one-step equation. We're going to divide both sides by 0.9 this time. So if I do 45 divided by 0.9, I get 50. So x equals 50, which if we put that in, then we ask ourselves, or we tell ourselves, 45 is 90% of 50. That makes sense. 90% is close to 100. 45 is close to 50. So that's a reasonable answer. What number is 30% of 70? So what number is, and then we have 30% of 70. So we don't know what it's going to equal. We write our percent as a decimal, and we multiply it times what we're taking the percent of, which is 70. And then we don't have, the variable's already by itself on the one side, so we don't have to get it alone. So then we just do 0.3 times 70, and we get x equals 21. So 30% of 70 equals 21. I want you to pause the video and write all of these down and do them. You can either use the proportion method or the equation, the percent proportion or the percent equation method, or both, to practice both. And then I want you to come back and pause and check your work. And if you have any wrong, that's okay. Make sure you find your mistakes and redo it the correct way. Okay, so here's what I got. You check your work as I go through. What number is 35% of 22? I did it in both methods. So whatever method you chose to do, you check. So it would be x over 22, because 22 is what I'm taking the percent of. X is the number I'm finding, equals 35 over 100, and then I did 22 times 35 divided by 100, and I get 7.7. If I set it up as the percent equation, what number is, that's my part. So it's going to be x equals, and then I change the percent to a decimal, times what I'm taking the percent of, and then we solve it like a one-step equation. We also get 7.7. 1% of 100 is 7, so I'm going to set that up. 1% of what number? That's the one that I don't know, so that's on the bottom, and I know that it's going to equal 7. I write 1 over 100 because that's my percent, solve the proportion, and I get 700. And then we would have 7 equals 0.01, because that's how I would write the percent, times x, because that's what I'm finding the percent of, which is 700. And then we have what percent of 65 is 13. So is 13 tells me that 13 goes on the top. Of 65 tells me 65 goes on the bottom, because that's what I'm taking the percent of. What percent? I don't know, so that's my x. And then I'm going to multiply 13 times 100, divide it by 65, and I get x equals 20%. So 20% of 65 is 13. And then if I'm going to set it up as the percent equation, is 13, which means that 13 is going to equal the percent, whatever it is, times 65, because we're taking the percent of 65, and then I solve it. Divide both sides by 65, 13 divided by 65, I get 20 hundredths, remember, or 0.20. But remember, we have to change it to a percent, so that's going to be 20%. And then our last problem for this video, a survey found that 25% of people aged 18 to 24 gave up their home phone and only use a cell phone. If 3,264 people only use a cell phone, how many people were surveyed? So 25%, we're going to write it as 25% of something, a certain amount of people, we don't know how many people were surveyed, equals 3,264. So basically that's pretty much written as the percent equation. As I talked out the problem in my head, that's kind of how I worded it. And that's, if you write it if you talk it out and write it out how you're thinking, that will help you figure out how to set it up. So then I can just rewrite this as 0.25 times x, because we're taking 25% of something, and we need to get 3,264. So then I can do my one-step equation, divide both sides by 2,500. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 3,264 divided by 0.25, because that will get x alone. If we do our little railroad tracks, divide by 2,500, and we get x equals 13,056. So that would be the total people surveyed. Alrighty, that's all I have. Keep your notes handy. Have a great day.